Today, inshallah, we're going to be dealing with a hadith which references Adam alayhi salam, a prophet of Islam, as being 60 cubits tall, which is like 27 meters. And they say this is unbelievable and impossible. But before we get to this hadith, let's talk about the Islamic stance on the theory of evolution. Generally speaking, talking about the theory of evolution, Muslims don't have an issue, or shouldn't really have an issue, with speciation, adaptation, or even evolution of animals, because we believe that there's nothing explicit in the Qur'an one way or the other. And I actually done a podcast with Abdullah al-Ujairi. Sheikh Abdullah al-Ujairi is a prominent figure in Saudi Arabia who researches these matters and well published in this field. In my discussion with him, this was his opinion. So, which is quite frankly like 99.9% if we look at it from a mass perspective, really 99.9% of the theory. The issue we have, we take issue with, or the point of evolution, the slither of which really diametrically opposes some of the Islamic narratives, is human evolution. Now, obviously, we have a narrative. We have a narrative in Islam, which is that Adam alayhi salam was created directly, or this prophet Adam was created directly by Allah, by God Almighty. And there are many things which differentiate human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom. Morality, the ability to question why, many different language, civilization, and so on and so forth. And it couldn't have been the case, we would argue, that we can actually in any way be equated to the rest of the animal kingdom, and there's something special about human beings. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, Allah says in the Qur'an that He has dignified the children of Adam. So we don't necessarily agree or disagree. We can remain agnostic as to Darwinian evolution with other animals, but as it relates to the human being, there is something special about the human being, and that is why Allah created human being directly. And in this hadith, there's indication that He created Adam in 60 cubits tall. Now, the question is, this seems unscientific on many grounds. And I'll tell you what, on three major grounds. Number one is biological. Number two is archaeological, or paleontological, you could say as well, from a fossil record perspective. And number three, looking at the kind of disparity in sizes. If we do assume that there was a human being of such great magnitude in terms of size, how can we explain the fact that human beings are like, give or take, 6 foot tall, give or take, half a meter or whatever it may be, or more, right? But how can you explain this huge disparity in the fact that you're saying that you believe in Adam, who's 27 meters tall, and a human being now, which is, typically anything between 5'5" to 6'5", and obviously there are extremities on both sides of that equation. There's people that are taller than 6'5", like myself, and people that are shorter than 5'5", like many people. So here, there's two parts of the hadith which we need to pay attention to, which is the first part of the hadith talks about that Allah created Adam 60 cubits tall. And in terms of hadith, there are some narrations which don't mention this 60 cubits. And there are some narrations that do mention the 60 cubits. But we don't say that just because there are some narrations that don't mention the 60 cubits, that the narrations that do mention the 60 cubits are erroneous. That makes no sense, actually. This doesn't, and some people have attempted to argue that this means that this should be disbanded. No, that doesn't mean, that's not how the hadith science works. So that's the first thing. Other people say the second part of the hadith, which talks about لم يزل الخلق ينقص حتى الآن, that the creation is becoming smaller and smaller until now. They found it problematic because Ibn Hajar himself, he mentions, how could it be the case that this is happening, right? And we can see Ad and Thamud's kind of indwellings, the archaeological remnants of their indwellings, and we can see that their houses and the doors and so on were not so tall. And he assumed, and without, by the way, nas and evidence, that Ad and Thamud were closer to Adam than they were to us human beings. And obviously the only real evidence we have anything between Nuh and Adam alayhi salam there's no evidence. I mean, there's only Israeliyat, or kind of biblical narrations. So potentially he was using those to kind of raise his eyebrow, but he did not say that this hadith was mu'allal or defective, as many believe that he did. Now, because of nas reasons or content reasons. Going now forward to answering the contentions. There are variations of this hadith which refer to fis sama', okay, that this was in the heaven. Not heaven as in Jannah, but fis sama'. Now, obviously, if you look at the Quranic cosmology, heaven, al-Jannah, is above. Okay, because obviously we know that the Prophet was taken there in the Isra wal Mi'raj. So it could be the case that this height and this mega size of 27 meters is specific to Jannah, and there's nothing wrong linguistically in believing that, because obviously we believe that Adam alayhi salam, he started his journey, yes, in heaven. I mean, we have a whole narrative where he was in a completely different place, and then Allah, he sent him down to the earth. He sent him down to the earth. Yes, he's created from the elements of the earth, but he was in many ways an extraterrestrial because he came from a completely different dimension and he came to this earth. Now, in that transition period, could he have shrunk? Could Allah have made him smaller? That's also a possibility. We're not disregarding that as a possibility, but there's no evidence of that from the Qur'an and Sunnah. So we can't say that that is what happened. What we will say is this. Let's assume that Allah, he brought Adam down. He was 60 cubits either in heaven and on earth, or in heaven or on the earth. But let's just assume that he was 60 cubits in heaven and on the earth. So when he came down, he was also 27 meters. Which, by the way, now we're starting to make assumptions which we don't necessarily need to make. We can say, no, he was like that height in heaven, and when he came on the earth, he became normal height. That's something you can assume from the source. But let's not assume that. Let's say he was 27 meters on the earth. What's the problem? What's the problem? The problem are three different things now. Number one, biology. If we use the human anatomy that we have today as the reference point, if the human anatomy today is the reference point, how could it be that something that tall, or a human being that tall, the bone structure can maintain that kind of size, right? Because it will collapse because of the weight of the human being. Well, this is a fallacy because we're not starting with the human being today as the reference point. We're starting with, why would you start with today's human being as the reference point? The reference point is that 27 meter human being that we're talking about. That's the reference point. So if someone says, well, we know that if we keep doubling sizes, as I've even heard some Muslims try and say, keep doubling sizes and height, then the height will be so tall, and then the weight will be so much, and then the bones will not be able to handle that. Density of the bones will not be able to handle that. You're using your reference point as the human anatomy of today, and then doing qiyas backwards, which is a qiyas mal farq, if you like, or a false type of analogy. It's a different kind, it's false kind of analogy. So that's the first problem. You can say, it's inconceivable that human anatomy can handle that size. Well, it's only inconceivable on the basis of analyzing today's human anatomy. That's the first thing. The second thing we may say is, someone could say, well, we talked about the biological problems, fossilization. How comes there is no fossil record of such a huge human? The National Science Foundation says that 99.9% of species have not undergone fossilization. So fossilization, you expect to find one specimen of a fossil of a human that we don't know, tens or 100,000, whatever it is, years that he existed before. No way. This is like finding a needle in a haystack. It's ridiculous to expect to find fossils like this. It's absolutely absurd. It's such a redundant interrogation. So that one would be put to the side. The third now interrogation is, well, how can we conceive of such a disparity between humans within the, or any kind of animal within the same species like this? They say we don't accept that. We don't accept that you can have a 27-meter human being and then you can have a 6-foot human being, and that disparity existed. And they say humans have been around for 350,000 years, which is, by the way, estimates we don't have to go with because they keep changing those, quite frankly. But let's just assume for the sake of argument. Are you saying to me, is my response, that you have, there's no species within the species that exhibit this decrease in size, this dramatic exponential decrease in size? Because I can give you an example of the dwarf elephants, which the Journal of Proceedings National Academy of Science shows. The dwarf elephants were 220 pounds. They went down in 800,000 years, according to the journal. In 800,000 years, they went down 100 times in size. So they were 100 times bigger than they were. They became dwarf elephants, 220 pounds, 100 kilos, which would mean that I'm bigger than those elephants. Me personally, the one who's talking to you imagine an elephant that I can pick up, or that you can pick up. And that would be heavier to pick me up than an elephant. I mean, this is just to give you some kind of visuals here. So if you can believe in an elephant that is that size, because you're looking at the fossil record and you're making your evolution inferences, then why can you not believe in a human being that's much bigger? That's just one of many examples, but within a very short time span in evolutionary terms. So why could not that happen to the human? I mean, if you really want to believe it on your paradigm, why could not that happen to the human being? So it's okay when you say these things, but it's not okay when we say these things. You make a mockery out of the hadith, but the hadith makes the mockery out of you, because this is actually what you believe in as well. And hopefully that answers the question. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.